Hey guys, I'm Greg Voros, the repair shop manager here at Gruhn Guitars. In front of me, I have a beautiful 66 Gibson SG, all right? And I want to talk about guitar setups and what a guitar setup fully entails, all right? So folks come in, they see me and the rest of the repairmen up here, and they ask us questions day in and day out, and it's a beautiful thing. One of the questions that I field the most is, what is a setup, okay? Well, a setup is something very important that everyone must consider when you're buying an instrument, when you're a player. Throughout the months in a person playing the instrument, it's going to slightly move around on you a little bit. You're not going to pick up on these slight movements until it feels really bad and the action might be really high. And that's usually the time that a person brings us their instruments for a setup. A general rule or something good to keep in mind is about once a year, it's a good idea to have a professional go through your instrument and give it a good setup. But as this professional is going through your instrument and giving it a setup, what should they be doing, okay? A lot of folks seem to think that it's replacing the strings, cleaning it up a little bit, and making a truss rod adjustment. Well, the reality is it's more complicated than that and way more time consuming than that as well, considering a setup makes up for about 45 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour 15 of a repair person's allowed time. That's why it hovers right at and or about $100 for that service. What is a setup? Okay, well, I give this this class in a few places around the country, where I always like to teach the basic principles of fretwork and then add to that the setup, okay? Because one is almost incomplete without the other. However, there are many instruments that are able to be set up without needing fretwork first, okay? Here at Gruhn's, we have a very systematic approach in how we carry out these setups, okay? Whether it's on a mandolin, banjo, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, the principles are 98% the same, okay? Due to the fact that the geometry is the same for the most part. So the same rules apply. The way to look at any instrument setup is you're looking at between 3, a lot of times it's 4 or 5 steps. In 5 steps, you would have covered every single steel stringed instrument out there in terms of a setup, okay? But you have to go in a very specific order to get to the goal line, to get exactly where you need to be. So the first thing that I do on any instrument when it hits my bench right in front of me, the first thing I do with some old gnarly strings on it is I go ahead and I put it in playing position, okay? I hold down the 1st fret on the high E and the 14th fret on the high E as well. I'll just go ahead and move the B string out of the way, and I want to tap right in the middlemost spot. I want to take that measurement and I want to check that on the low E as well. Okay? I want the gaps on both sides to be even, and if it's not, that'll tell me that the neck has a little bit of twist in it. Okay? All right. The next measurement I'm going to take, which all of this should take you about 7 seconds to do. 1st fret, last fret, and I tap near the center, and I do the same thing on the low E string, the 1st and the last, and I tap somewhere near the center there. Okay. So the first measurements that I took from the 1st to the 14th, that tells me what the truss rod is able to adjust. Okay. The 1st and the last fret is a measurement that I take that's somewhat out of my hands in terms of adjustment. I cannot make an adjustment here that'll impact its extension. Making a truss rod adjustment from 1st to the 14th, sometimes it can impact the extension, but it's good to know what the extension is doing and that variable being out of your hands in that way. So once you take these 4 measurements, okay, 1st 12th, 1st 14th and the 1st 14th, and then the 1st and the last, the 1st fret and the last, that should give you a topographical map of what you're looking at once you sight the neck. Okay, so I see a lot of folks sighting necks in this fashion as well, which is great. However, you can deflect the neck in an unnatural way. Doing it in the way by using the strings, it's going to give you the same reading all the time. All right. So once that tells me that, I know what I have to work with and whether I have to couple the basic or the standard setup in with fretwork or not. And I know exactly how it's going to come out when I'm done. All right. So in this case, of course, it's ready to go. It's going to need a setup. So I'll go ahead and take all the strings off of the instrument in one shot, and I'll clean up the entire guitar, the fingerboard, using fine grade steel wool to clean up the frets, the body, and I go through the entire instrument. On an electric guitar, I'll go ahead and drop the pickups by a good 2-30 seconds each. And I'll tell you guys why in a second here as I go on the setup process. So the first step, the first real step in any setup actually happens once the strings are already on the instrument. So we'll go ahead and restring the instrument, okay, a brand new set of strings, and tune it to pitch. The first step in a setup is to go ahead and adjust the truss rod. That's the first step every single time. It's a building process. So you want to go ahead and adjust the neck of the instrument by way of the truss rod till it's almost perfectly straight. It's key. It's almost perfectly straight. That's a few thousandths of an inch and you're good to go. All right. The second step as part of a setup is going to have to do with your action, okay? Your bridge and or saddles, all right? So when folks say something along the lines of, oh, I just want to drop my action, go ahead and give me a truss rod adjustment, it's not complete. It's not necessarily is what I always say to that. So after the neck is adjusted, you want to go ahead and adjust for the action at the saddle and or bridge. Keep in mind, when this measurement is taken, it's always taken at the 12th fret with a ruler with the first fret held down on each one of the strings. Okay, that's step number 2. Step number 3 is the nut, all right? So anytime you're making a nut adjustment that we're doing here, of course, we want to go ahead and put the neck rest right under where we're working. In this case, it's going to be the nut. The nut has 2 jobs, okay? It's to space the grouping of the strings and to get you past the first fret, all right? So by holding down the 3rd fret and tapping over the 1st, once you hear a little ping, that means there's ample clearance of the nut to get you past the 1st. If it's spaced well, then the nut is doing its job. That's the only job that your nut has, is to space and get you past the 1st fret. And that's going to be step number 3. Step number 4, I'm going to intonate the instrument, okay? In this case, it's going to be saddles that are movable by way of a screw, whether I want to close up that scale length or open it up. What you want to do is the open string or the harmonic, okay, is made to match the fretted 12th, and that gets done for each one of the strings. All right, that would be step number 4. Now, step number 5 is, in this case of an electric guitar, is actually dialing in the pickup heights. Now, one of the first things I did before I even started the setup is I dropped the pickups down a little bit, and the reason behind that is that as I'm adjusting the action and the neck, as I'm making these adjustments, what I don't want is to have the magnet of the pickup interfere with my setup if it's just a hair too tall. So I know as part of my last step, I'm going to dial that in at the end, so I just went ahead and dropped them down. And what I want to look for there is I want to hold down the last fret, okay, and I want to take a measurement from the pull piece. Real straightforward, and I want to do that, in this case, on the 2 E's, okay? I'm looking for 230 seconds on a humbucker, 330 seconds on a single coil pickup. So that's going to be the 5th step. In an acoustic guitar, of course, it's not going to have a pickup, or not in this layout. It's going to be much different. You're not going to be able to adjust the height in that way. So an acoustic guitar technically has only really 3 steps to it. The intonation is fixed. That would be step number 4. But that is exactly what goes into a setup. So if you change that order in any way, you're going to throw your setup completely. That's why one of the last steps is going to be the intonation. That's very, very important for everyone to keep in mind. Also, stretching of the strings is an incredibly important process, and that should be done with going every step along the way. It's very, very important in that. So as soon as I put the strings on, the new set of strings, I go ahead and tune it. I start already stretching the strings on the instrument, okay? Because there's a lot of slop that you want to take out, and the last thing you want to have happen is when you're all done with the setup to give it to your customer, as far as speaking from experience that is, and then having that instrument be out of tune. I never like that. I always want it to be perfect when I hand it back to the person in that way. So I actually stretch the strings out between 10 and 15 times throughout the setup process. So I hope this was of help. Here from Gruhn Guitars, I'm Greg Voros, and I'll see you guys next time.